The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata. Today is the 6th day of this 7-day sesshin here at Mountain Gate in northern New Mexico in July 2021. Early in sesshin, the subject of adverse childhood experiences was brought up. And there was a great deal of talk about how it impacts our attempts to do Zen practice. And it can go up and down. It's generally a long haul for people. And most people who come to Zen practice, perhaps all people who come to Zen practice, are coming out of a felt need to, it may not be conscious, but really to open to something beyond the pain and suffering that is in people's lives. Very, very few human beings come into this world, have an ideal childhood in the sense of being nurtured and supported. It doesn't matter necessarily so much about physical wealth, although certainly getting basic needs met, food and some form of housing and so on. And there's many different variations on that. I remember when in Rochester, for senior people, including 1 or 2 monks, I don't remember, I think it might have been 2 monks, went on pilgrimage, maybe it was 3. Anyway, these guys all went on a pilgrimage, and it included Burma, where I had lived for almost 3 years. And they went to Mandalay and actually encountered the consulate driver that had been working for us when my husband was the consul in Mandalay. But it was interesting. When they came back, their comments were about how poor the people were in Burma. And they specifically mentioned their houses. Well, Burma is a tropical country, and to have a big insulated house against the constant rain that happens in certain parts of Burma, or the extreme heat that happens in other parts of Burma, isn't necessarily ideal. And what most people live in is a house that is has got walls made of woven bamboo, and that's perfectly functional. I doubt that people who live in those houses felt a need for something more elegant or more seemingly princely. It's all relative. But the basic fact is that we come into this life and we have experiences. And as a result of those experiences, we develop ideas about ourselves in particular. And usually they are very negative feelings about ourselves. We're not good enough. Otherwise, we would have been taken care of in appropriate ways. We would have been loved. We would have been supported. And it's very interesting to note the very long list of what are considered adverse childhood experiences, going all the way from abandonment, which we spoke of earlier, can mean simply that the main caregiver died, or became so ill they couldn't take care of us, or for some other reason was not able to fulfill that most essential work of nurturing us, and there was nobody else who could step in and do it. It goes all the way down to, I think the last thing on the list that I saw recently was divorce, and divorce impacts kids. especially if we're young, even if kids are older, it's an impact. But especially if we're young, because suddenly our any sense of security we might have had, and we might not have had a sense of security, because often if there's a divorce, it's because the parents are not harmonious with each other. And that's a very scary environment to live in. So even that, which is quite endemic these days, can be a source of trauma for children. And it is classic that a child who is not given the type of nurturing, consistent nurturing that every child deserves, every human being deserves, they develop a sense that the only reason could be that they're not good enough. And it's a very deep and pervasive sense. And it's often shut down, but it pops out in other ways. And one way it can pop out in is whether we feel even remotely competent in our Zen practice. I struggled for years just trying to do the practice against this whole assumption that I couldn't possibly manage it. I wasn't good enough. I couldn't do it. There's something called learned helplessness that takes place for people who are constantly put down, or whose needs are not met when they should be. And so if enough of that happens, then we develop the sense that it's impossible. I couldn't possibly manage it because I've never been able to. And so that kind of thing can be a real roadblock in our Zen practice. It also, as you recall, Joko Beck mentioning, it causes us to develop a sort of a strategy of how to survive. And we use that strategy, whatever it is, to feel like we can survive in a situation, feel like we can get our needs met. But particularly as we get to be adults, it begins to show its dysfunctionality. And more than that, when this results of this adverse childhood set of experiences is in any way mirrored, we react. It's painful. Often we'll fight back. And the curious thing is that this strategy that we have developed is not necessarily accurate or clear. And I think of my own life. I remember going into therapy quite a bit, actually. And at one point, I just felt like there was something it just was just below the surface. And this is a psychological issue I was thinking of. I didn't know what it was. It just was a sense that there was something at my back, and I needed to open up to it. I wanted to open up to it so that, because by then I had recognized that if I did open up to the difficult feelings, I was able to work with them in a way that they were diminished and dissolved and no longer operant in my life. And so I really, really wanted to address whatever it was. And the therapist that I was seeing at the time suggested I do a session of what is known as short-term psychodynamic therapy. So I set something up, and for 4 hours, I was literally grilled until it broke me, basically. This is a type of therapy. One has to be really seriously mentally, emotionally very healthy in order to manage to well, my first word that comes to mind is survive. And I almost didn't survive it. However, it was incredibly valuable because I, somewhere towards the end of it, the therapist said something, and I saw it through my usual filter of being accused of something negative. And I said that to him, and he said, no, I didn't say that. And I realized that he really hadn't, that I had interpreted it through my customary lens of being not good enough and having to survive somehow. And it was really eye-opening. After that, speaking of eye-opening, I've got an itchy eye here. After that, there was an evening, and many of you have heard this story before, when it was a Sunday evening. I was at the Rochester Zen Center, living at the Rochester Zen Center, and I went to Star Market for something or other. I don't even remember what it was. And as I'm in the checkout line, I get up to the checkout cashier, and she is in one of the most aggressive, shitty mind states I can imagine. Ordinarily, this would have been an enormous red flag for me. I would have been seriously reactive because I would have taken it personally. But all of a sudden I realized, wait a minute, it's not about me. She's just having a bad hair day. And a sense of euphoria that came forth from that, a sense of freedom, not to have to assume what somebody else was thinking about me, or even if they were, because she was focused on me, but it was about her difficult mind state. It was not about my worth. And somehow that registered. This is something that can be a gift for each one of us as we continue to do our practice. It is quite amazing. In a book called Silent Illumination by Chan Master Guo, who is a Dharma successor of the famous Chan Master Sheng Yen, who was born and raised in mainland China, ended up during the Cultural Revolution in Taiwan, struggled to get out of the military, where people were actually shot if they wanted to leave, and ended up becoming a world-class teacher. He's sort of in our radar because he and Roshi Kapleau became friends. Eventually, Sheng Yen went to Japan to study, he got a PhD in Buddhist studies at a Rinzai monastery, Rinzai University in Japan, and then set up shop in Taiwan and also in the United States in a part of New York. And he and Roshi Kapleau remained friends. So it is something that as I said, is on our radar, anybody who trained with the Rochester Zen Center. And his Dharma successor, or his main Dharma successor, Guo, was originally a monk and eventually decided that he would be more effective in reaching people with the Dharma if he returned to lay life. And he's a university professor at, I think, Eastern Florida University. And if you get a chance to check out any of his YouTube videos, it's worth it. This silent illumination is something that was inveighed against because it was misunderstood by Hakuin. Silent illumination, as it's taught by Guogu, is a way to seriously, significantly deepen our practice. And it works, it actually is an aspect of the Susokan, the extended breath practice, that is one of our major focuses here. And here is what he says about this. If you're meditating on the sensations of the breath, which is what you're doing when you're doing the extended out breath, while cultivating an attitude of interest, then every breath is fascinating and includes new sensations. This interest keeps you on the method being the means to come to awakening, the process, the extended out breath, and the curiosity, openness to possibility. There's no need to get rid of wandering thoughts. Just be more interested in your method, in the experience of this extended out breath, how it feels in your body. It's very, very powerful. And as you do that, you can become aware of things about maybe some past actions that you've done that were suddenly you're seeing them in fresh light, in a clearer light, and you realize that maybe you were not as compassionate, as clear, as open, as let go as you would have wanted to be. And that's actually quite an excellent point in practice. Here, we're working on the long maturation at the same time we're working on coming to awakening, because a kensho is worthless unless we're able to live the truth that we realize through it. And all along the way in our Zen practice, the more we see where our behavior is not necessarily in line with our true nature, and we accept that and work towards not behaving in that way, it makes a big difference in our ongoing life. And it also influences other people as well. There's a book called Training in Tenderness that is the teachings of a Tibetan Buddhist master named Dzigard Kongtrul. And this is also something that naturally takes place in our Zen practice if we are working in a clear and open and curious way. If we're working in the way that Guogu describes, opening to the experience of the physical sensations of the out-breath and an interest in exploring them, ignoring the thoughts. We don't have to do anything about them. They'll come, they'll go. It's like the clouds in the sky coming and going. Sometimes it obscures the moon or the sun, and sometimes it doesn't. Right now it's kind of totally overcast out there. We are in the rainy season, and that's fine. There's nothing better or worse about an overcast sky. There is a Tibetan word, Tsewa, that it means a level of tenderness that in English might be called love. And this Tibetan teacher says it's better to use Tsewa and when we're considering that feeling, because love has all kinds of mixed up connotations. And it is fraught with strings attached to it, Whereas Tsewa is a deep tenderness in our own heart. And in this book, Control speaks of how when we are truly feeling tender, that is a source of fulfillment and happiness. The danger and the typical thing that most human beings in these days do to try to get that fulfilling feeling is to find it outside of ourselves. And it's interesting because today I got an email about the upcoming marriage of a couple of Dharma friends of mine who are getting married tomorrow, actually, in Europe. And when we seek happiness outside of ourselves in some other person or some other situation, in a certain way, it's doomed, because it's dependent on that other person or that other situation being a certain way, and things change. If there is anything constant in this world, in this life, it is change. And so to chase after some outside assumption of fulfillment is never going to be a permanent fix. The only reason why I stuck it out through grueling years of Zen practice in my own life was because I recognized at a certain point that there wasn't ever going to be anything outside me that was going to provide lasting happiness, lasting fulfillment, that the only place I was going to be able to find that was within my own being, my own heart, my own life. And it's true. I've had enough examples where it didn't work, even though it seemed like it was going to initially and for a while. And yet, when we are able to open our hearts with this sense of tsewa, the sense of tenderness towards all beings, which is a challenge, but it comes eventually with the practice. The more we let go of what we think we need, in particular, let go of this sense of being somebody who needs to have certain things in order to be happy, or is easily insulted, or is often wronged, or any other things that we assume about ourselves, which, interestingly enough, in our behavior, in our assumption, coming from those assumptions, we tend to draw to ourselves situations that will actually reinforce those assumptions. And it's really interesting. When I was in high school, I was always the last person to know when a boyfriend was departing, let's say. I just wouldn't get a call. There was no goodbye. There was no, well, nothing. And it was always devastating. In fact, at one point, I had been really, truly in love with a guy. This was out of high school, just after I graduated from high school, before I went to college. And he'd given me his ring, his class ring. We were going steady. It looked like the future was going to open up in a beautiful way. And then he stopped calling. I still had his ring. He didn't ask for it back. And finally, another classmate said her brother would like to have a date with me, and would I be willing to double date with him? So I thought, all right, I got to do something. I had no interest in this other guy. And the classic date when you're living in Crown Point, Indiana, is to go into Chicago and wander about in the Museum of Science and Industry. And so that's what we did. And as we're walking around, all of a sudden I see my boyfriend walking with another woman, holding hands with her. And my friend was looking at me when I saw him, and I was in shock. I felt like I'd been stabbed in the chest. And my friend said, "Oh my goodness, what happened? Are you okay?" And it was the shock of the rejection, sudden, clear, right there in front of my eyes. Because for me, I'd been seeking somebody to really care for me for a long, long time, because it hadn't happened when I was growing up. Not through any fault of my father. He was drafted and sent overseas during the war when I was a small child, and he was my connection in the family. So these kinds of things live in us and impact our Zen practice mightily. At the same time, our Zen practice, when it's appropriately done, and we can use it to avoid feeling these things, it opens us up to those primal feelings of loss, of need, of anguish, of not good enough, and all the rest, which offers us a prime seat, the best opportunity to open to the experience and work with it, to see how now it may not be true. The Buddha himself said all beings are perfect, whole, and complete, endowed with this incredible mind of compassion and wisdom to which I've just opened. All beings. That means any of us who are thinking we're not good enough, any of us who are thinking that we didn't get what we needed when we were small children because something was wrong, we were bad. It wasn't that. It was the adults in our lives were not able to provide for whatever reasons. But underneath this shell of self-image is this tender heart, this openness, this compassion, this wisdom, this innate perfection, this not needing anything to be fulfilled. And our Zen practice will ultimately open us to that, in which case we will able to be offering that same Tsewa to all beings, even those who are negative towards us, even those who might harm us. It's quite amazing. And it's part of our practice. It's not a part of our practice that we were taught in the old days. In the old days, it was just do this mu practice, knock everything else out of the water, and come to awakening, and then you're home free. Except that you're still not free because you still haven't addressed your issues. You still haven't worked with your core beliefs. You still haven't worked with your strategies to get your way in the world. In this way, we work here where we are open to possibility and extending the out breath and feeling how that very experience feels in our body, yet with a sense of curiosity, a sense of, I might be able to open to something. I might be able to recognize something really, really important and freeing. But of course, all of this has to go beneath the level of words in order to be effective. But it is effective. It's a struggle for a long time because part of us wants to hold back and protect that painful part of ourselves that feels inadequate, that feels not good enough, that feels hurt, that feels angry, that feels grief. But in order to become free, we have to become free of that too, which means to open up to the whole catastrophe, as John Kabat-Zinn quoted Zorba the Great about. And then there is the full potential for becoming free of it through radical acceptance, through, if necessary, working with a skilled therapist who understands Zen practice or meditation practice. And it's all part of practice. It's all part of reaching a state where that shell is gradually dissolved and this luminous transparency that is who we really are, this birthright, is revealed. Where our Tsewa, our tender heart, is revealed. Where we are not invested in having to be a particular way, and so we can be open to all beings and feel their pain and respond with tenderness. And when we're let go enough, we usually respond in the most appropriate ways. That is the gift of this life. That is the gift of this practice. And everyone can do it. It takes hard work, as many of you already know. But it's possible, and it's so worth it. So in these last hours of sesshin, we just have a day and a few hours left before the end of sesshin. We've already gotten a lot of work done, whether it feels like that or not. Just keep going, because now is the most potent part of sesshin, because you've been doing all this work in these previous days. And it's wonderful to see how hard people are working. Just keep it up. Keep it up. It is worth it. I thank you for listening. We'll stop now and recite the 4 vows.